Hi everyone, I'm coming from you live from my front room. I'm hoping that it's not dark and it's just the way that my camera is set up. I'm doing the workshop that Barbara had put on post on board, resolving conflict with difficult people. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Before I get started, my name is Yvette. I'm a mental health, substance abuse, and child trauma counselor. I live in Columbia, South Carolina, and I put all my information in the bio, in the description. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please hit me up as I go. Also, if you have any questions, drop them in the post. I'm going to be looking back and forth on here regarding to see if I see any comments. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today we're going to talk about resolving conflict with difficult people. Before I get started, I want to first define conflict. Hi Barbara. Conflict, so that we are all on the same page, is a disagreement typically, or argument. I'm going to push this back a little bit. I feel so close. Okay, that's better. A disagreement or typically an argument. And it says that when I was looking this up, it says typically a protracted one. So I was like, oh, that sounds a really big fancy word. And that's protracted is lasting a very long time. That's conflict. Now let's define difficult. Difficult is defined as needing much effort or skill to accomplish. Talking to difficult people can be needing much effort or skills to talk to them. Everything that I talk about regarding this workshop is about how you interpret the person, not the person. We label people based on what we think they are, and we label people based on our filters, what's going on in our lives. And if someone presents themselves in front of us and we cannot go into our minds and find something to attach to that person, or a problem to attach to that person, and a resolution or some way, or know someone on how we dealt with that, we label that person as difficult. Now that person could be very well within the realm or the scope of who they are and what they like to do or whatever, but because we are our skills are limited in dealing with people like that, we identify them as what's this behind me? I should have moved that before I started talking. We label them as difficult. First off, before we get started, establish rules. Rules can be one-sided, and what I mean by that is rules can be something that only you are aware of. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Now, if the person is truly difficult, then they're not going to be aware, or they're probably not going to abide by or agree to your rules. So these are rules that, that's just in your mind, something that you're dealing with, something that you are aware of. So that's the first thing. Establish rules. Rules can be no name calling. I'm not going to call names. I'm not going to allow them call me names. If they start calling names, if they start saying things, then it's time for you to disengage. No cursing. That could be a rule of yours. You can make that clear. Could we just keep this line of communication amicable? And if that person begins cursing, disengage. Determine what you will allow and what you won't allow. I always say, and I'm getting ahead of myself, keep your hands to yourself. Sometimes when we get frustrated, we get angry, it's easy to just to react or to start to put your hands on someone. But I always say, woman, male, cat, dog, hitting people get hit. If you don't want to get hit, don't hit. Disengage when your expectations aren't being met. If the conversation is not proactive, if the conversation is not moving along swiftly or productive or being productive, disengage. Stay on topic. We can many times we get in conversation and conflict, and the first thing that happens is we disengage. Hi Craig. We get off topic. We're upset about one thing, and then before the conversation gets to that, before we resolve that situation, we end up talking about the dog urinating on the carpet. And it's like, why are we here? Stay on topic. If we can't stay on topic, disengage. You're going to hear me saying that and see me saying that a lot, because in order to resolve anything, you have to have a plan. A plan says that what we're going to do is we're going to come together, we're going to discuss this issue, and if there's a problem with it, we're going to try to find a solution or a resolution between the two of us. If we cannot find a resolution, we're going to learn to agree to disagree. That term is overused, but I highly recommend it. Agree to disagree. You decide that, that's your position, this is my position. If we can't cohabitate together, if we can't regarding this issue, then we're not going to talk about this issue. Actively listen when you're speaking by acknowledging feelings. Now, I like to say that many people listen to answer and they don't listen to hear. The difference is listening to answer is you're waiting on something to spike your interest or that you can refute immediately, because that happens when someone says something and then you immediately come back and you begin to overtalk each other. So now you're listening to refute. You're listening for a rebuttal so that you can give a rebuttal, and you're not listening to solve a problem. If your point is not getting across, if you're not making any progress, my favorite word that I started with, disengage. It's not about just what you're accomplishing. Also, it's about what the other person is accomplishing also. If they're not if you're not making any progress, if they're not making any progress, disengage. I said actively listen. The next thing, there are 4 types of listeners. Time-oriented listeners, action-oriented listeners, content-oriented listeners, and people-oriented listeners. Those are the 4 types of listeners that they are. Time-oriented listener is the person like this, looking at their watch, going, how long are we going to be here? And they want information to be clear, cut to the point, because they don't want to hear all the information about, and why you did something. They're just going to hear what happened, how we can fix it. Let's get to the point. If that's the person that you're talking to, keep that in mind. If you're the person that's like that, keep that in mind, because someone else may not be that type of person. Action-oriented listeners. These are strictly on task. How can we fix this? They focus on solving the problem only. We talk about, if there's a flood in the house, the first thing this person is going to do is they're going to start calling people. They're not going to discuss it. They're not going to sit and rebuttal, oh my God, what should we do? In my Kevin Hart voice. They're not going to do that. They're going to get on the phone and start making phone calls. They're going to start talking to people. They're going to start, okay, how are we going to problem solve this? That's the action-oriented person. The content-oriented person is the person that listens to the facts only. They don't want to hear the small talk. And that's different from the time-oriented person, because the time-oriented person, if I go back, they can listen to the small talk. They can listen to that, but they're still watching their clock. We need to get to the point on this. The content is listening for the facts, and they're going to only, all the emotional stuff they're not going to want to deal with. If that's you, then that's, then be mindful if that's the person that you're talking to. We label people based on the information that we have. I like to say this. We have filters in our life. Just think about it this way. Just go with me on this trip. if every year that you were born, you have a different filter, right? And every year, like when you go to the doctor's office, and optometrist, and they click the little thing, and you get a filter. She said, "Can you see now?" Or he said, "Can you see now? Can you see now? Clear, clear." So what if every year we got a different filter? Every year we got a different lens, and as we get older, we start to see clearer because we start to see problems as they are, and in a big scope of things versus just straight narrow as when we are younger. So for every year you got a filter. That means however old you are, that's how many filters you have. So if you're talking to a 5-year-old kid, and I'm off topic just a little bit. If you're talking to a 5-year-old kid, that kid only has 5 filters, regardless to how many things have happened to that child's life. I'm live, Jackie. Regardless to how many things, that's my daughter. That regardless to how many things that has happened in that child's life, they still only have 5 filters, and they can only see the life through those 5 filters. If you're 45, that's 45 filters. If you're 50, that's 50 filters. Now, what happens is the more filters you get, your peripheral vision expands. Instead of being narrow and straight to the point, it comes out. So you start to see everything that's around you for every filter that you get. Keep that in mind when you're talking to somebody younger or you're talking to somebody older. They can see something that you don't see. And you can keep that in mind also if you're talking to somebody wiser. They can see things that you cannot see, or you may not hear, or you may not be aware of. So keep all of that in mind when we label them difficult. Are they difficult, or is it because we don't have enough filters in our life to deal with this person? And people-oriented listener. These people focus on our feelings. How do you feel about certain? May not get to the bottom of the problem, may not solve the problem. They just want to know how you feel about it. If that's you, then adjust accordingly. If that's someone that you're talking to, make the necessary adjustments. Be willing to compromise. Compromise is not a bad thing. When we hear that compromise, we think about when we hear the term compromise, we think about things such as compromising our standards or our character or anything. We're going to take those two things and we're going to put them on the shelf. And we're going to consider compromise. When we talk about compromise, we're going to talk about compromising based solely on what we're talking about, solely on what's going on in front of us. And what can we give up to make this, to find a resolution? And what can we gain to find the resolution? So be willing to compromise. As tempting as it may be, don't purposely push buttons. I know that can be very, very tempting. And depending on the person, place, or person, place, or thing, it can be very like, oh, snap. Don't push buttons. Because if you're trying to find a resolution, then that's going to prevent that. Listen to what isn't being said. Hear what's being said, but listen to what isn't being said. Our body language, our speech, how we sit, how we engage, all of that is speaking volumes to us. Listen to what isn't being said. Hear with your eyes as well as your ears. Many times the dominant personality will, people just kind of fold underneath them. They kind of just because at the end of the conversation, especially if a conversation has been going on for a while, they just kind of just stop talking. And the dominant personality walks away with the thought that they've made their point across, and this is a dead subject, and we ain't gonna talk about this no more because we found a resolution. And only thing that happened was the dominant personality was allowed to speak the longest, and everybody else just stopped talking. That does not mean a resolution was found. If you are the dominant personality, keep that in mind when people stop talking. Maybe it's time for you to start listening. when, if at the end of every conversation or every conflict or anything, any type of intermingling with anyone, and there's a disagreement, if you are always the last person speaking, many times that can say, not saying that it is, because somebody's going to email me or text me and say, Yvette, that's not what it always, no, it's not. But many times that is saying that you are probably the dominant personality. And people, instead of continuously fighting, they just stop talking. They just say, you know what, this ain't getting nowhere. I'm just going to sit here and let them run out of words. And usually that happens. And when that happens, conflict, it does not mean that you've won the battle or a resolution is found. It does not mean anything, but you have a domineering personality, and people just don't want to deal with you. And you are likely the conflict, the difficult person that people are talking about. If, like I said earlier, if the other person won't listen at all, if they're just not hearing you, if you feel like there's nothing is going on. I remember a time, I'm gonna tell y'all the story. Something happened in my home, and I had to call the police. And it was with one of my children. Okay, I'm gonna tell y'all. My son ran away, or he said he was running away. So I called the police and I said, look, my son is 17 years old and he's run away. And long story short, the police came, and the officer that was there, she said, so what's going on? I told her, I said, he left and I don't know where he is and this. So she says, the police officer, she's standing in my front room, and she says, I don't know how we got on this subject, but she says, well, if he comes back, you have to let him in. Because about South Carolina law, he's underage, and because he's underage, no, he was 16. Because he's underage, you have to let him in. So I said, so you mean to tell me if he decides to run away every weekend, that I have to let him back in? She said yes. And then I said, not at 113. And that's the first numbers in my address. And she said, no matter what you say, that you still have to let him in. And I said, not here. Not here. He can't leave every weekend and then just come back when he want to. And she says, well, by law, you have to let him in. And if you didn't, you'll be breaking the law. And I said, well, not here. He can't just leave and come back and just think that that's okay. And I just have to let him in, you know. And then she said, well, according to South Carolina law, and I realized that there was she had her laws in front of her, and I had my principle in front of me. And because the two was not, we weren't going to find a resolution. So I said, you know what, stop. That's not why you're here. You're here because he did not come home. It's my duty as his mom to report that he's missing. That's all I got. I'm not going to continue to go back and forth with you. And so, you know, when I said that, it was like she stepped back and was like, okay, where do you go from there? I'm not going to continue this because you say by law that I have to let him in. I say that he can't leave every weekend and come back when he wants to. So you have your law and I have my principle. If there's no meeting in the middle, then you'll probably be coming here next week to pick me up because he can't do that. And so, you know, when you find that there is no resolution, disengage. There's no point in this conversation. We're not going to continue going back and forth. You stating your principle, me stating my principle, and neither one of us are willing to bend. Disengage. Identify. When you don't, before I get there, when you don't understand something, get clarification. Ask. So tell me what you mean by that. Or when you said this is what I think you meant. Is that what you mean? If that's how they respond, if you can get clarification, then you can move forward. When you can't get clarification, what happens is you, in your mind, you're thinking one thing, so you begin to respond based off what you're thinking. In their mind, they're thinking one thing, so they begin to speak based off what they're thinking. And so when there's a smidgen of miscommunication, the gap increases in resolution. The gap increases in trying to find an answer to this. So you continue to go back and forth, and then before you realize that y'all on two different planets. One is in this place, one is so as soon as something is said that you don't understand or you think it may have an alternative meaning, then you ask. So tell me what you meant by that. In normal conversation, that's likely shade. ask, so wait, when you said this, tell me what you meant by that. Because I want to make sure I get clarification before I draw a conclusion based off what I think you meant. And that itself is the key to resolving conflict with difficult people, to get clarification. And what I was saying earlier when I first started, it's not about the person, it's about our skill set in dealing with that person or that type of person. If our skills are limited in dealing with anyone, we label them difficult. We label kids hard. We label kids difficult. We label kids defiant. We label kids troublemakers. We label them that because our skills are limited in dealing with them. So, and because our skills are limited in dealing with them, that's a troubled kid. I've substituted almost all over this world, or should I say in a couple of states, not all over this world. And what I realize is that every child, most times, and also I've worked in a juvenile detention center, and what I realize is the kids that were labeled difficult or hard, what we used to call in the country hard-headed, were kids that had a lot going on in their lives, and their filters were limited, and they couldn't see much. And because they couldn't see much, or things would happen to them that they have nothing in their lives to connect it to see how to resolve it, they became labeled as difficult. Now think about this. Remember the filters that I was talking to? If every year you got a different lens, right? And that lens not open, took you from here to here, and now your peripheral is you can see almost behind your head. Because see, my hands are, you can't see them, but my hands are, I can see my hands out the side of my eyes, out in my peripheral vision. So if you go from here all the way out to here, you can't see my hands, but just go with it. Now, every time something happens in your life, it's almost like sandpaper that scratches the lens. So if you have a kid that has been traumatized, you have a kid that's been beat, a kid that's been molested, you have a kid that's been abused, a kid that's been picked on in high school or in elementary school, a kid that go to school with no clean clothes on. Now that kid becomes an adult, and when that kid becomes an adult, all those things that happen scratch that lens, scratched every one of those lenses. And so as those lenses became scratched, they don't get unscratched. They still try to see through those scratched lenses. Now their peripheral becomes wider, but they still see through those scratched lenses. Now this person now been labeled difficult all their childhood life. Now they're labeled difficult as an adult. Should we just stop? How do we work with these people? If we are these people, how do people work with us? By one, acknowledging it. I might be a difficult person. Now, in order to get scratches off a lens, it's got to be sanded down with the finer sandpaper. It's going to take some grinding. It's going to take some cleansing. It's going to take some pain, because all of these things that we've learned throughout our lives, we now realize that they can be a little different. Maybe it's something that I need to give up. Maybe it's something that I need to do myself for me in order to become a better person for people to talk to. Now, here are things a couple of things that before I end that I want to mention. Identify the difficult people in your life, and many times difficult is synonymous with angry. Identify these people. Make a list of them. Know who they are. Physically to yourself. This is not someone that you're going to go, you're difficult. Now you're being petty. We're not doing that. Physically identify, thanks Craig, physically identify them, if only to yourself. Limit direct contact with them. There is nothing you can do to change someone. They're going to have to want to change themselves. There's nothing you can do. Now, The good thing about this is one thing, and I use this analogy often, and I read it one time and loved it, but I still have not went back and looked it up. There's a tribe in Africa that I was reading on. When someone did something to break the law or break their tribe rules, they would isolate them. They didn't have to go anywhere. They stayed in wherever their area was, but no one spoke to them. It is highly effective. Highly effective. Disengage. People that are difficult need time to reflect. That's the bottom line. And if they don't have time to reflect, as long as they're spewing their venom on other people, that's not enough time for them to reflect on but when people disengage from them on a consistent, continuous basis, they have nothing to do but to reflect and say, and their behavior will change. Even if it's just you. And the whole office or everybody in the house is still cradling to this person. Even if it's you, disengage. Now, I'm not talking to, I am talking to, and I'm not going to say that because I don't want to separate anybody's house. So you make the call on your own. Limit direct contact with them. Make the difficult decision if necessary. Sometimes conflict often has negative connotation. Sometimes it does. It does have a negative connotation. It can destroy a company or organization or family. It can lower morale, disrupt harmony in a home. It can bring change to include positive changes. Every change that we've had regarding inequalities for people of color or inequalities, period, has happened through conflict. Somebody decided to say no. So growth cannot happen until conflict occurs. I'm not going to say that. Growth many times doesn't happen until conflict occurs. It can bring change to include positive changes. It can also bring negative changes. It can be underestimated. Its effects can be devastating. It can be overestimated and have little effect on change. Apologize. If you find that you are the difficult person, apologize. If you're wrong, apologize. Now, there are 3 components to apologizing. 1, saying I'm sorry. 2, saying it was my fault. I was responsible for this. And 3, what can I do to change this? Now, many times we overlook the third one. What can I do, to fix this? Sometimes there's nothing you can do to fix. But just hearing that someone is willing to do what they can to fix it can be beneficial. What now? Where do we go from here? Incorporate listening skills. Listen to hear the person's emotions, their feelings, and not to respond. Remain mindful. Be the first to tell yourself when you have hurt someone's feelings. If you have hurt someone, be mindful of that. I regurgitate my day every day. At the end of my day, I lay in my bed and I physically go over my day. What did I say or do? Sometimes I miss things, but many times I don't. And I try to fix whatever if I overlooked or if I said something that was out of line. Be present during a conflict. There's nothing worse than engaging in someone and their mind is somewhere else. They're on a phone or they're staring off or something. If it's a conflict and it involves you, be present. Keep your hands and your feet, body parts, body fluids, spit to yourself. Hitting people get hit. Now, if that's your outcome, that's your goal, then you know that. You know what's going to happen. But if it's not, women, men, boys, and girls. I've read so many issues on social media where women are hitting men, and then when they strike back, I hear the term, I'm a woman. I'm sorry, were you not a woman before you hit? Hitting people get hit. So keep that in mind. Engage to find a solution. If your outcome is not to find a solution, then disengage. Engage to find a solution. Not to point out the other person's wrong, not to not to do anything but to find a solution to the problem, that you're going to stay on contact with. Establish rules, even if to yourself. This is what I'm going to tolerate. This is what I'm not going to tolerate. This is what's going to cause me to disengage. Name callings, hitting, anything like that. Disengage. Identify the angry people. If you cannot find any, make sure the angry person is not yourself. Avoid asking the question why. Why did you do this? Ask more beneficial questions like, what were you thinking when you made this decision? How was this decision beneficial for you based on what you were thinking? Questions like that get you a better answer than, why did you do this? Because many people don't ask, I don't know. Find a resolution. Be willing to compromise. Never compromise standards or principles, but compromise based on the issue that's at hand. And the last thing, if all else fails, or if you decide that you may need professional assistance, go get a mediator. Find a counselor. Find a mediator. Find someone to intervene, to speak for you guys. That's all I have. I hope this was beneficial. I hope that you found something in it that you can learn from and grow from. Better decisions, better health. I believe that when we get the information that we need, we can make better decisions. Those better decisions can bring us better health. And it all depends on what we have, what tools we currently have. That is my time. I will stay on for a couple of more seconds if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And then I'm out. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me. And peace.